Signora.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. I would now like to give the floor to speakers on behalf of political groups. We start by the PPE, Mr. Lennartz.
Thank you, Madam President. 667. That is how many people have lost their lives in the Mediterranean this year. The worst number in 3 years. People with a name, fathers, mothers and children, people like you and me drowning in the cold water after being pushed onto a crappy boat by unscrupulous criminals. Each and every one of them an unspeakable tragedy. We must break these cynic business models, and to do that we need a common European answer. And it's not rocket science. The proposals are there. Strong border control and cooperation with third countries. Quick screening to distinguish between refugees and economic migrants. Fair and fast procedures to help those in need and return others. And solidarity among member states to tackle this together. The proposals have been here for many years, but what we need is real willingness from the member states, from you, Minister, in the Council, to break finally that deadlock. Because it's a scandal that 6 years after the peak of the migration crisis, thousands more people have drowned while we are not one single step closer to a European solution. So please, member states, spare us the empty expressions of shock at yet another tragedy. Spare us the hollow words of sympathy with victims and families. Spare us the bureaucratic newspeak on constructive cooperation in the Council. Spare us all of this and instead finally take responsibility. Lives depend on it. Our citizens expect it of you. You must finally deliver. Thank you.
Grazzi ħafna, issa fisem il-grupp.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the SND for 2 minutes, Simona Bonafè.
Grazie Presidente.
Thank you, President. Well, here we are again in plenary talking about yet another incident off the coast of Libya, which cost the lives of all the people on the vessel concerned, perhaps 130, perhaps more. This was a tragedy that could and should have been avoided and once again highlights the lack of clear and effective coordination of search and rescue operations at sea. The appropriate European and Libyan authorities were informed as to what was happening, but it took more than 48 hours for rescuers to arrive, and once they got there, it was too late. How could that have happened? Europe can no longer look away and pretend not to see what's happening. Without effective European coordination, any search and rescue operation at sea is impossible, and the number of deaths in the Mediterranean will simply increase. Now, saving lives at sea is an obligation under European and international law, but quite apart from that, saving human life is for us a non-negotiable principle. Saving lives comes first. As the S&D Group, we believe that it's essential and urgent to take a new approach to search and rescue operations. We need a permanent European instrument with more effective coordination between national authorities and with equipment and financial resources made available in order to boost the capacity to intervene. Current procedures don't work. The summer's coming, weather conditions are improving, and the humanitarian situation in the Mediterranean will get worse. The presentation of a new pact on migration and asylum is not enough. There, by the way, we continue to see the same level of resistance from national governments, those who already scuppered reform of the Dublin regulation. We now need European solidarity-based management of this issue. The Commission needs immediately to start working on a new ad hoc operational plan for search and rescue operations at sea, with precise commitments on relocations in Europe. We need humanitarian pathways for legal entry, and we need to deal with the traffickers. Any other emergency or propaganda-based response just kicks the problem down the road and costs human lives.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Renew, Malik Azmani.
Thank you, Madam President. For how many years have we already been debating the terrible, deadly tragedies in the Mediterranean in this House? As long as we keep a migration system in the air in which there is a perverse incentive that an irregular trip gives you a chance to get a residence permit in Europe, the cynical business model of people smugglers will reign supreme and more people will die on boats. The only way is to prevent migrants from leaving the mainland via people smugglers in unsteady boats. Agreement with third countries are then necessary by providing shelters in the region to tackle people smuggling and other legal avenues, such as asylum by invitation, resettlement, but also through reform of the labour migration policy. Because we know that the majority of those who want to reach Europe from North Africa are not seeking protection, but are looking for a better future in Europe. And I don't blame them. It has already been 8 months since the Commission presented the new migration package, but there's no real progress among the member states. Some member states don't like the border procedures, and some other member states do not want complete relocation. We saw the same dilemma in the previous proposals. And how do we resolve this deadlock? The answer is simple. We currently put all our energy into the internal dimension of migration. What we need is to shift our focus towards the external dimension to avoid those terrible tragedies in the Mediterranean. It's precisely in this external dimension that member states find each other. If you focus on the external dimension and regulate migration to Europe via legal channels, the problem of the internal dimension will diminish. Which brings me to my concluding question. Which steps do the Commission and the Council representative foresee in the coming months on the external dimension of migration? And Madam Chair, allow me to thank also Madam Commissioner for her statement on the current situation in Ceuta. And indeed, the Spanish borders on Ceuta and Melilla are also European borders, and Morocco needs that also to acknowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Kelma għal minuta.
Thank you for a minute and a half, Annalisa Tardino, on behalf of ID.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. We've held several debates on this issue and there's been no result. Deaths at sea continue and so do illegal arrivals. The numbers in Italy have tripled and Frontex says that there's an increase of 157% arrivals across the Mediterranean and 70,000 are preparing to leave for Sicily. Now, apart from some individual actions, such as that carried out by Matteo Salvini when he was a minister in Italy, who bravely managed the emergency, from Europe we only get signs of weakness and inertia. Solidarity and condolences from Brussels are not enough. We need clear policies. This debate is yet another defeat. Here and in the Commission, people continue to follow unrealistic ideas full of misguided good intentions, but they're impractical. The title of this debate proves that. We were supposed to be discussing deaths at sea and the situation in Lampedusa, but we preferred to talk about search and rescue activities at sea, even though, if you recall, in 2019, the Parliament rejected a resolution on this. Now, the activities of NGOs can't be the solution, and nor can obsolete European operations at sea, which incentivised people to leave illegally. Let's stop the deaths. Let's stop people leaving and protect everyone's rights, those who need protection and those who have had enough of seeing this distress. We've had enough of bleeding heart do-gooders hotspots which are used to welcome in the slaves of the new millennium. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Marquardt for 2 minutes for the Greens is next.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, the title of this debate is Search and Rescue and Recent Deaths, but almost everyone is talking about migration policy. That's quite interesting. But if we're going to take the title of this debate seriously, then it's nothing to do with migratory policy. It's a decision that we need to take. If you say, okay, the priority is to rescue, or we have to do whatever we can to save lives, that priority then needs to be put into practice clearly. If we're talking about migration policy, then we're not saying human rights, the right to life, the value of life is untouchable and we have to do our utmost to rescue people at sea. It's absurd that we have a situation where you can't get a search and rescue exercise underway because you have to wait 2 days before a ship is taken, even if you ring 7 times. It's quite absurd that it seems to be our preference to send these people back to Tunisia rather than rescue them. So I think if we're going to take this seriously and say we are Europe, we stand by human rights and the value of human life, then we have to do everything to rescue these people. If we're going to take that seriously, I don't understand why the Commission is not funding search and rescue NGOs in the Mediterranean. I don't understand why vessels are not being alerted to rescue operations. So it seems to be the wrong decision. I think we need to take this seriously and make sure that we do everything possible to save lives rather than just talk about migration.
Tal-Konservattivi u Riformisti Nicola Procaccini għal minuta u nofs.
Nicola Procaccini for ECR, 1.5 minutes.
Grazie Presidente. Sappiamo da...
Thank you, President. Well, for years we've known that there's been, if you see more people trying to cross the sea illegally, there'll be more deaths at sea. More people leave, the more tragedies there are, and the more business there is for human traffickers. They often have active cooperation from NGO vessels, as has recently been shown by the Italian judiciary. Now, we, from the European right, cannot accept the death of any migrant, whereas it's clear that for the radical left, these deaths are necessary to feed their pro-immigration view, i.e. their no borders view. We believe we need to work with African states. We need to establish who has the right to international protection before people leave, and then provide them with free of charge, safe transport for Europe. And then they also need to be given jobs and the means to live a dignified life. That's our solution to prevent what's happening at sea, and also to take the burden off border states like Italy, Spain, etc., whose situation is really becoming very difficult because of the unmanageable numbers of arrivals. Will the European institutions finally be brave enough and honest enough to go for our way of thinking rather than persevering with a line that has so far only caused desperation, disorder and illegality? Thank you.
Thank you. Malin Björk for the left, 1.5 minutes.
This is not a new debate. In 2013, 360 people drowned off the coast of Lampedusa. But after that, there was a great search and rescue operation with many countries taking part, Italy more than others with Mare Nostrum. But since that, several political leaders and EU leaders have withdrawn and said, no, we're not going to save lives in the Mediterranean. And the individual governments and the EU withdrew funding. There are the NGOs have been showing solidarity, have been saving thousands of lives in the Mediterranean, and what is the result? They've been criminalised, they've been persecuted, their boats have been confiscated, they've been taken to court. We've got to put a stop to that. These are NGOs. But that's not enough. It's not enough to persecute those saving lives in the Mediterranean. But they've also had their licenses withdrawn, and we've seen dangerous pushbacks in the Mediterranean. I'm not going to talk about the different proposals to solve the big migration policy in the EU. That's not what we should be talking about. We need to be talking about how we save lives and stop criminalising those that are saving lives.
Issa fisem il-membri mhux affiljati għal minuta ngħaddi l-kelma lil
Thank you, President. Since the start of the year, we've had the highest number of victims recorded on the Mediterranean route. We're talking 3 times as many victims as we had last year. And we have to wonder what has led to the lack of coordination, the lack of effective European policy, and also the criminalisation of search and rescue operations. We're struggling to find a common position on search and rescue, and also disembarkations and relocations across the European Union of migrants. There have been vain calls for solidarity with member states who are in the first line and for a fair division of responsibilities. There's been no establishment of safe and legal pathways to fight traffickers, but we tolerate cooperation with countries that are accused of violating human rights. So the consequence of the fact that these lives are lost is the result of European policies. We need to save human lives. It's a moral necessity.
Lil Paolo Rangel għal minuta u nofs.
Paolo Rangel for 1.5 minutes.
Obrigado.
Thank you, President. Minister, Commissioner, welcome, Minister, for the first time in the House of European Democracy. Many will be speaking today correctly of deaths in the Mediterranean, which in 2021 are already over 700. And remember, there's the Atlantic, the desperate situation in the Canaries and in Ceuta. But this dreadful tragedy shouldn't make us forget the tragedy of migrants who are not at sea or in the refugee centres, but who are exploited on land, on the European continent and in my country. 2 weeks ago, we heard that tens of thousands of migrants, virtually all of them from Asia, are living in inhuman conditions, total economic exploitation like slavery. There are 10 living in one room, paying very high rents. Often they have their passports taken away and they are working from dawn to dusk. And the Portuguese government, like others in Europe, knew about this exploitation. And these migrants need rescuing too. And our governments also have obligations, not just third countries. We need to care for all migrants, those who are risking their lives at sea and those who are wasting their lives on land. As John 23rd said, all people are human.
Aguiar for 2 minutes.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner Johansson, Presidency of the Council. Deaths in the Mediterranean.
Muertes en el Mediterráneo.
Here again, we're talking about deaths in the Mediterranean and the absence of sufficient search and rescue. I remind you that each human life counts. The 130 that died trying to get to Lampedusa on the 21st of April, and the one that lost their life yesterday on the way to Ceuta, the external border of Europe, the only terrestrial border of the EU with the African continent, and this vessel that left Mauritania. Commissioner Johansson, you talked about Asha and the others on board, that true nightmare that eliminated the romantic tales of such travels from previous centuries. And Libya, the massive violations of human rights of those trying to reach the coast of the European Union. And there's no point externalising the borders, remembering that life and its integrity should prevail over the strengthening of EU borders. We need an EU mechanism for search and rescue. The Spanish forces rescued 3 survivors of those who left Mauritania, but apart from that, we need safe and secure legal channels towards Europe, as we've often said in this Parliament, and safe ports in Europe aid in the countries of origin and transit, but criminal persecution of human traffickers, so that we don't have to constantly stand here and convert these debates on deaths in the Mediterranean into debates on migration. Thank you.
Thank you. Fabienne Keller for 1.5 minutes is next.
Madame la Présidente,
President, Commissioner Ylva Johansson, Minister of State Augusto Santos Silva, we have tools to act now and stop these human dramas at sea. 2 years after the Parliament resolution on the same subject, deaths and rescue at sea, let's not hide behind the slowness of the Asylum Migration Pact, allowing inaction to triumph. The ports of first call cannot manage the flows alone. The Sicilians, Malta, the Maltese, the Canary Islands, Greece, Ceuta can't manage this alone. 2 concrete actions. First of all, states should reinstate the Malta Declaration, which was launched on the initiative of France and Germany to release the pressure on ports of first entry. Minister of State, would you be prepared to get a strong coalition of states in Council who have willingness to provide true EU solidarity? And Madam Commissioner, the Commission could organise more coordinated crisis management. That is provided for in Article 33 of the Dublin Regulation. That would allow the Commission to better coordinate the actions of the agencies and Frontex, and give urgent aid to Lampedusa or Ceuta in case of critical situations. We need a response on the ground.
Senora Keller is...
Thank you, Mrs. Keller. Hallard Filimski for 1 minute is next.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Well, previous speakers have quite rightly said that this is a debate on search and rescue, so we have to say quite clearly, of course, any human being who is in danger needs to be rescued. The political question is what makes sense if someone is 20 kilometers from the Libyan coast, rescuing them there and then bringing them more than 500 kilometres to the European coast, or whether it would be better to take them back to where they came from, for example, Libya. Then you have absurd situations such as the situation in Ceuta, where yesterday you have up to 6,000 people swimming from Morocco to Spain, and there are probably going to be more wishing to come. And we've had this debate since 2015. I've been here since 2014, and every year we have the same debate. The EU is not in a position to effectively solve this problem. So Europe should close its borders.
Saskia Brickmont.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes, Saskia Brickmont.
Madame le Commissaire.
Commissioner, Mr. Silva, I've listened carefully, but I wonder what's changed from one debate to the next. 667 deaths. That's the number of people who died this year in the Mediterranean. Where's our indignation? How many more debates are we going to have? How many deaths? How many families with no news? How many people unburied? Corpses in the Mediterranean do we need for our policies to change? Trying to fight against smugglers and smuggling, externalising the handling of asylum applications to Libya, throwing up higher and higher walls, undermining fundamental rights, rejecting solidarity, making reception inhumane, getting in the way of search and rescue at sea. Hoping that member states hoping that arrivals will stop. We are throwing up a fortress Europe, which is creating more and more deaths, being hard in the name of fighting against the extreme right. It's only by firmly rejecting their values that we will push them back. We shouldn't be fearing them getting into power. It's their ideology of hate that we should be fearing contaminating us. The implementation of search and rescue operations at sea is something that the European Union needs to do itself. It needs to open safe legal routes. They are not just legal. This is not just a legal choice, but a moral choice.
Jorge Usade, for 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Well, during an unprecedented act of aggression, 5,000 Moroccans invaded and crossed the Spanish border yesterday. Now, this is a radical Muslim government that is feeding this illegal entry into Spain. This is a government that receives billions from Europe every year. I'm sure the globalists will be pleased that this is happening, but in Ceuta, Melilla, the Canary Islands, and everywhere, Barcelona, Madrid, Seville, people don't think that. Let's show European solidarity here. Let's stop all payments to Morocco immediately. Let's impose sanctions and stop issuing visas, and let's stop giving European nationality to Moroccans. Let's stop this illegal migration. The future of Europe doesn't take place through online debates on the climate. The future of Europe is taking place today and is at stake. The Spanish army has been mobilized. Thank you.
Buxade is 1 minuta Idoia Villanueva Ruiz.
1 minute, Idoia Villanueva Ruiz.
personas.
667 people assassinated this year. This is our responsibility. We have unfair development, trade policies that increase inequalities, and labour conditions are poor. We need a border regime which does not serve those who are doing the work that the EU should be doing. We cannot construct a Europe with a future if we allow human rights to be for sale. We cannot criminalise those persons and organisations helping. The solution is not more Frontex, it's an autonomous and fair border policy which goes to the core of the problems and where the responsibility is shared by the entire EU.
Thank you, and now for the next speaker for 1 minute.
For 1 minute.
Thank you, President. While humanitarian organisations like the Catalan NGO Open Arms that rescue people at sea face the bilateral hostility of governments, too often border patrols welcome migrants with violence, shoot them or let them drown, and these crimes are left unpunished. Member States are only trying to cover it up, and the Commission has not clarified what role Frontex is playing in this. As we speak, hundreds are trying to swim to reach the Tarajal beach in Spain. In this same place, in February 2014, the Spanish Guardia Civil fired rubber bullets against a group of migrants desperate trying to swim ashore, and 15 of them drowned. All efforts to clarify responsibilities for this atrocious crime have failed. 15 people were murdered at Tarajal Beach. 7 years later, no one has been convicted. When it comes to investigating the Guardia Civil, Spanish judges are blind. And as usual, this case has met just the indifference and the silence of the Commission. Thank you.
Grazzi ħafna. Issa Lena Dupont għal minuta u nofs.
Lena Dupont for 1.5 minutes.
So thanks, Madam President. There can be and there will be no doubts. Saving lives at sea, fulfilling international, European and moral obligation is key. But search and rescue alone won't solve the dire situation, because crossing the Mediterranean is still the effect and not the cause. Thus, our aim still needs to be working together closely with third countries, improving sustainable living conditions, preventing people from making these dangerous crossings, taking decisive actions against smugglers and traffickers. Colleagues, we all know that it's by far easier to give simple answers than addressing a complex issue with an even more complex political answer, trying to get 3 institutions, 27 member states and at least most political families on board. Nevertheless, future assessments will be made on the improvement on the current situation. So it was good that we at least started discussing the new pact, that member states were willing to talk about it again. But we need more than willingness, we need decision and compromise. And part of the truth is the whole pact will not work without effective border control and border management, and will not work if we don't step our efforts for effective returns. So for this year, discussion is good, delivering is better. With illegal crossings on the rise, with secondary movement on the rise, we see that there is an urgent need for more pace, more ambition, more Europe at the heart of the asylum and migration package. The only thing we don't have more of is time. So let's not waste any more of it, cautiously staring at each other, waiting for the other institution to move first. Let's start delivering.
Thank you very much. And now the next speaker is Pedro Marquez for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, Minister, Commissioner. A humanitarian crisis started too many years ago. Europe is still trying to find and implement the proper answers, unfortunately. More than 600 people have already died this year, human beings. A solidary response from Member States, Minister, is needed when scores of refugees seek protection in our countries. Basic values are at stake when we talk about saving lives, about rescues at sea. Protect and not criminalise those that are protecting our basic values, like the NGOs at sea. Criminalise and never protect the smugglers that profit from desperation. On the external dimension of our policy, if we want to save lives, what we have to do is to properly handle, through the partnerships with countries in Africa in particular, the situation of these migrants and refugees, promote economic and social development. Commissioner, we need it for now, not for tomorrow, the full implementation of the Global Europe Initiative. The strand for the southern countries can provide up to 30 billion investment in these countries. Certainly, the complex situation of Ceuta, as you have referred, is now in our eyes, but also the situation of countries of origin like Libya or all the sub-Saharan Africa from which these people in despair come to Europe. We need to act now. We need to act now to create hope where they only see despair at this moment. Thank you.
Grazie ħafna. Issa ngħaddi l-kelma għal minuta.
Thank you very much. For the next speaker, to Maite Pagazurtundwa for 1.5 minutes.
Gracias, President.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, Minister Santos. Deaths in the central Mediterranean are growing. We're talking about more than 700 deaths when there aren't so many people moving around right now. And we know that on the 22nd of April, 130 people in dinghies died, and it could have been avoided because we knew they were drifting. But we know that the authorities have no rescue capacities in the Mediterranean, but the coordination centre on land isn't working properly either. We're seeing commercial vessels and NGOs doing the work that institutions need to do. You have to have a great deal of imagination and determination to believe that the Libyan Coast Guard is actually preventing death. So let's speak seriously. The Council is shirking its common responsibility, particularly to the southern European border, without a model of refuge and asylum and a model of legal migration. The edges of Europe will continue to feel it. Morocco is playing with Spain and the EU. It allowed around 5,000 people to reach Ceuta swimming yesterday. 1,500 of them were children, and it's a small town. And so third countries are key. We need a common European model of asylum. We need to avoid this blackmail, and we need to ensure that the EU helps Ceuta now.
Peter.
Thank you very much. Peter Kofod is the next speaker.
Tak for det, formand. Tusindvis af migranter drukner i...
Thank you, President. Well, thousands of migrants are drowning in the Mediterranean. Human traffickers are earning a lot of money. The external borders are left to their own devices, and Europe is overwhelmed by refugees who are impossible to integrate. The asylum system is not working, and it is a disaster. Things are tragic. How can the EU continue along this path? Well, for decades now, human rights and good-heartedness are preached, and we want to maintain things. The only model, however, that will work is the Australian one. We need secure and closed borders. We need to prevent migration. We need to ensure that returns take place. We need to save Europe. Let's build Fortress Europe.
Thank you. And now for the next speaker, please. And it's Damien Carême.
President, Commissioner, Minister, 4. That's the number of plenary debates we've had since the start of this legislature. That's more than 7 hours of debate. Over 3,400 men, women and children have died during that time in the Mediterranean. We always see the same thing. At sea, more people are dying and political leaders look elsewhere. For how much longer are we going to continue debating rather than taking the decisions we need to take to save lives? How long are we going to allow Frontex to abandon vessels to their fate? For how long are we going to believe that the migration pact presented by the Commissioner will bring the solutions we need when it's actually inapplicable? It can't be applied. Europe is complicit, and worse still, it has become cynical. Commissioner, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let's shoulder our responsibilities now, immediately. Let's create a European search and rescue mission and...
Thank you very much. And now, Asito Kanko for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, dear Minister. I will speak in Dutch. Al 701 mensen stierven.
701 people have already deceased or been reported missing in the Mediterranean, according to the UN. 701 people. We defend animal rights, which is a good thing, but when it comes to human rights, we don't really have a European policy. Traffickers know that and make use of it. 701 people, that's almost 6 people per day, almost as many people as in this hemicycle. The EU is not doing what it should be doing, not concluding the right agreements with the right countries. 5,000 migrants arrived in rubber dinghies just across the sea. We need to do something about the traffickers, conclude agreements with partners and build stability in places of war. But not to continue this silence. We need to prevent these deaths.
And now, Sira Rego for 1 minute.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Mrs. Johansson, you don't know how difficult it is to discuss this issue in just 1 minute, to sum up the pain of lost lives, 600 now, to say in a minute that this isn't the result of chance, it's the result of political decisions taken at the European level. It's the resulting from walls, pushbacks, a la carte deportations. 1 minute to say that it is the dirty business of just a few. But there is one thing that I can say to you, Commissioner Johansson, in this minute. There is no police force, there is no political decision, there is no wall that can stop the human will to survive, to leave war, poverty and the consequences of climate change. Mrs. Johansson, let's do something. Let's stop sending Frontex to cause problems. We need a proper European search and rescue mission. Mrs. Johansson, let's open the path to human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for the next speaker, Balas Hidvegi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Thousands of migrants arrived at the shores of Italy last week, and the numbers keep rising. It's been 6 years since the migration crisis began. We've had several debates, yet the EU is still making the same mistakes. The crisis will never be stopped and solved unless a completely new approach is taken. Sentimentalism is not the right answer here. The EU should clarify once and for all that illegal arrivals are not tolerated either at sea or at land. Decisions on applications should be made prior to entry into Europe, and those who do not have a right to enter or to stay should be returned. Europe has to send the right messages. NGO ships, for instance, that cooperate with human smugglers must be stopped. And it's not acceptable to tolerate and to encourage the activism of these NGOs as a transport service for illegal migration. The best way to avoid such tragedies on the Mediterranean is to make every effort that those ships never leave the coasts of Africa in the first place. We have to help where help is needed in Africa instead of bringing the problem into Europe that we cannot solve.
Thank you. Issa ngħaddi l-kelma lil Thomas Tobé għal minuta u nofs.